My name is Ryan Nave. I'm the editor-in-chief of Mississippi Today. I'd like to welcome you to the panel, Why There Shouldn't Be Tornadoes in January. No, it's actually, this panel is not all gloom and doom. The actual title of the panel is Beyond Disasters, telling stories about resilience in Mississippi and the South. And I'm really excited about it because Mississippi Today made a decision last year to expand our environmental coverage. And so we have some really exciting projects that we're working on that we're hoping to publish the first part of the year. So be on the lookout for those stories. I'd like to introduce our moderator and our panelists. Our moderator is Lindsay Gilpin. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of Southerly, an independent media organization that focuses on ecology, justice, and culture in the American South. As a reporter and editor, she's covered climate change, energy, environmental justice, and other issues all over the United States. Her work has appeared in numerous outlets, including the Washington Post, City Lab, and The Atlantic. She is a Kentucky native and has a master's degree from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, and is based in Durham, North Carolina. Next, we have Heather McTeer-Toney. She is the National Field Director for Moms Clean Air Force, which is working to unite parents around the country against air pollution. She served 2 terms as mayor of Greenville from 2004 to 2012. She was the first African American, first female, and youngest person to hold that office. In 2014, she was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency for the Southeast region. Next up, we have Mayor George Flags. He's currently the mayor of Vicksburg, serving his 2nd term. He's also he's on the executive committee of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, which is a coalition of mayors that promotes economic and environmental security and stability along the Mississippi River corridor. Before becoming mayor, he represented his district in the Mississippi House of Representatives from 1988 until 2013. Finally, Larison Campbell is a reporter at Mississippi Today and the 2nd Greenville native on our panel. She covers politics with an emphasis on public health. She got her start working for television shows with multiple networks before joining Mississippi Today's reporting team in March 2016. She's a 2018 National Press Foundation Fellow in Public Health and a 2019 Blue Cross and Blue Shield Foundation of Massachusetts Fellow in Healthcare Reporting. And now I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. This panel is incredibly timely, as you just mentioned, on this 70-degree January day when there's intense storms happening. So I'm excited to talk about how that plays out in all of your all's communities. So as the editor of a magazine that covers how people interact with their environment in the South, I'm used to, and really one of the reasons I'm doing this work is because there are so many times that national reporters come to the South when there's a hurricane, when there's a disaster, when there's a chemical spill, and sort of that's the headline, and then everyone leaves. And it's really important to have local journalism, regional and local and hyperlocal, to cover these issues all the time. And that's the reason for this panel today, is to talk about the challenges that we're all facing and our panelists are facing in their work day to day because of climate change, because of pollution, because of energy transitions, and also the responses to those challenges and how we're trying to build a healthier, more affordable, more accessible, equitable place to live. So first, I'd love all 3 of you all actually to just talk a little bit more about your work and why this topic of resilience in the South and kind of creating more sustainable, just places to live is important to you.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for coming out through the storms. I was just on the phone texting my parents to make sure they were okay, because Greenville, Mississippi suffered tremendous damage last night as a result of tornadoes and hurricanes, good Lord, of just storms that have come through. But it is truly indicative of what we are experiencing in terms of the climate crisis. I work with Moms Clean Air Force and the National Field Director. We are an organization of over 1.2 moms, dads, grandmas, abuelas, godmothers, big mamas, cousins, aunties, whatever you want to call it, people who are concerned about children's health. And our focus is to ensure that we're talking about climate pollution and air pollution in a way that is protecting our future. And I came to Moms actually after working with the EPA and after the administration change, and at the time with a 6-month-old son. And so my former boss, Gina McCarthy, who was the administrator at the time, said, Heather, you picked a heck of a time to have a baby, right in the middle of talking about climate crisis. But it was interesting to me how when I was pregnant and when I was working with EPA across 8 states in the Southeast, how I was seeing what mothers and childbearing women and children were experiencing on a day-to-day basis because I was pregnant. So when it came to the Zika virus being impacted throughout the Southeast and warm states, I could not travel there because I was pregnant and I might be impacted. When it came to the water crisis in Flint, Michigan and EJ issues, I was breastfeeding and I understood so clear what mothers were going through when you couldn't even drink the water for fear that it may pass on to your child. Dealing with farm workers in California and in Florida and in Mississippi, where people and moms were very concerned because when they were coming into the home, their little child, their toddler, couldn't run up and grab them, and they couldn't grab and give them a hug and a kiss for fear of the toxins that were on their clothing that came from farming. So it took on a new light for me, and it was really, I think, a growth of what I had always been doing, because the way I got to EPA was through Greenville, Mississippi. It was through working on water and infrastructure issues that impacted the community and the people that I loved and who had raised me, and trying to fix those problems from a community perspective is what catapulted me to EPA. And so it was through a visit from then Lisa Jackson, who was the administrator, who made Greenville her first stop when she was appointed and came to look at issues of the environment across the South, because she's from New Orleans. And she stopped in Greenville, and after we had an opportunity to tour, she said, I want you to do something for me. Would you mind serving on the local government and advisory board for EPA? And I was so excited. I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. She said, hold on, because you don't know what I just asked you to do. And she was absolutely right, because 2 weeks later, BP oil spill happened, and I was charged with working with elected officials from across the country. And the point was to make sure that local people had an opportunity to talk about what their solutions were and to be a part of that process. And so today, I think that that's one of the most important parts. It's why I was really excited about being a part of this panel, because the first word in this forum is people. And it's the piece of it when we talk about politics and we talk about press and we talk about media and telling stories that's so often missing. It's the people that we have to talk about, and the impacts to people and the environmental impacts to people and how they are left out of this process and this conversation. That really is going to propel us, I think, into solving not only climate crisis, but really impacting infrastructure development, community development, and how we see it across the scope of our work. And I'm just really excited that I get to do it through the lens of being a mama and a wife and a former recovering elected official and all those great things.
Well, good morning. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and thanks for Mississippi today, and certainly thanks for the high honor of being on a panel with all these ladies. I really appreciate that. But let me just say it very quickly. First, I'm a little different from most of the politicians, so I know I'm in a room full of journalists, so everything that I say is going to be the truth, so help me God. So, but let me just say this, is that I spent 25 years in the legislature and enjoyed every minute of it. I was elected as mayor about 6 years ago, and I've enjoyed every bit of it and continue to enjoy it. Worked about 3 hours a day. The rest of it is I delegated authority, and it works pretty good. But let me just say, as it relates to the city of Vicksburg, 25,000 people went to the city of Vicksburg. There was $394 in the bank. $33 million budget. I took $3 million out the budget and put it in reserves and been in ever since. I've given 3 raises. I've given raised minimum wage 3 times. Oh, by the way, I'm a conservative. I'm very fiscal conservative. I've done it in the legislature. I don't raise taxes. But as relates to environmental, and why you probably invited me here, is that since I've been mayor of Vicksburg, we have privatized our water treatment and our wastewater plant. And because of that, and as a result of that, we've been able to save money, and at the same time, we've gotten 2 awards as relates to our quality of water because of the fact of what we've done in the past. The other thing is that in doing that, we went with we had a court, we was on a court decree, and that is that we had to be marshaled by the courts as to what we should do with our water treatment. We are no longer under a court decree anymore because of the fact of the benchmarks that I put into how we was going to measure and how we was going to certify the courts on that. On our water quality, we got an award of the best water in the state of Mississippi. And I assume that's better than bottled water. But we got that, and we don't understand. The other thing as it relates to what we have to deal with mostly is, and thank God the Corps of Engineers right across the street from my office, I have a great relationship with them, is to deal with the floods. The floods, most of us in North Vicksburg, but at the same time, we have what you call a flood wall, and we have to put it up every time we believe that it's going to exceed the flood stage. So we watch it very closely. I have some thoughts about the floods along the Mississippi, why. As a legislator, I think it has a lot to do with people, those people that are folks in Congress, when they was too conservative and did not fund the Corps of Engineers, when they should have been funding the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers was not able to dredge, and I think most of our problem is a combination of not being able to dredge, sedimentation, and the depth of the river, and as relates to climate change, yes, we are receiving more rain, but I don't think the congressional delegation got ahead of the curve and started preparing for it, for what we think. I remember growing up as a child, we used to swim in the Mississippi River, and a lot and play with it. That was our pool, because we were poor. We didn't go to the city pool. We went to the river. That's how I learned to swim. I guess that's how I learned to survive. But be it may, is that I wouldn't swim in it tomorrow because how it changed and how federal government and state government has ignored the Mississippi River. But be as it may, it is what it is, and we live. And having said that, I'm going to say this last, and I probably should have said it, because you don't see this in my biographic or something. My dad and mama couldn't read and write. I finished college. My son has a civil engineering degree and a law degree. My grandson is number 40 for Tulane linebacker, and they beat Southern Mississippi.
Hi, I'm Larison Campbell. As my editor Ryan mentioned, I report on politics and public health at Mississippi Today. And this is an environmental panel. So having somebody who reports on public health might kind of seem like a stretch, except that to kind of piggyback off of what Heather was saying, recently, as we're sort of talking about the environment and really making our climate discussions more personal, there has been a lot of research done into the public health effects of the changing climate. I think, and I'm working on this big project right now that is looking at specifically the mental health effects of climate change. I've been down on the coast a lot over the last few months, and this story is, to back up a little bit, if y'all remember about 5 years ago, down in Hancock County,
there was an enormous explosion of foster care cases. And I think when people step back, they kind of said, well, you know, Hancock County, it's in between Biloxi, it's in New Orleans. It is, by Mississippi standards at least, relatively well-to-do, not a huge poverty rate there compared to the rest of the state. You know, it's not, actually, to point out, this is a 50% Greenville, Mississippi panel right now. Heather and I are both from Greenville, and it's not the Delta. You know, when you think about really entrenched poverty, it's not that region of the state. But there was this theory down there among social workers, among pastors, among local officials, that what they were seeing in 2015 was delayed trauma from Hurricane Katrina, which had been 10 years earlier. That the children of Hurricane Katrina who went through that trauma were now adults, and a lot of them had children of their own. And so a couple of years ago, someone kind of tipped me off to that theory. When there was a ton of reporting done on it, you know, I just don't know that, again, back to the problem of journalistic resources, I don't know that there were really resources at the time to devote to covering more than sort of the surface area of the problem. And so I really wanted to get in there and say, okay, like, is this a real thing? Is it a theory? Are they scapegoating this, you know, problem on something that happened 10 years ago when really it's, you know, it's just the way that the state Child Protection Services was set up. You know, it's youth court judges, it's, you know, things like that that are easier to fix. And one of the things that I found is that there is, in fact, an enormous drug problem in Hancock County. And of course, as we all know, one of the first things, one of the biggest effects of childhood trauma is drugs. And at the same time that I've been reporting on this, there's been a ton of research done up at the Center for Climate Studies at Harvard, the T.H. Chan School. Yes, I always want to call it P.F. Chang, and it's just not. Anyway, up there, they are actually in the middle of holding a variety of sort of summits, closed-door summits, unfortunately, because I've tried to get in, with researchers talking about the mental health effects of climate change. One of the big areas they're looking at is this sort of trauma from natural disasters. You know, we saw it with Katrina, we saw it with Hurricane Harvey, we are probably going to see it with the wildfires, even up in Northern California, that I think if you think about our environment, you know, there's nothing more external than the environment, is there? I mean, really, than the weather, say. And there's nothing really more internal than mental health and the way our minds work. But there really is this very direct connection between the two. And so they're looking at that. They're looking at the increases in temperatures and how that affects test scores in schools. And there's a ton of science going on with that right now. And there is a ton of research being done that really does back up this theory that the problems that, you know, we've seen along the coast, in Hancock County specifically, really might be related to this. And so one of the big conversations that I think is really important to have right now is what can be done about this? Like, at this point, you know, it's kind of that snowball effect. You know, these disasters are happening, these storms are getting worse. So is it really our responsibility, you know, as locals, as individuals, it'd be great, we definitely want to do something to, you know, to stop climate change, but also what systems can our governments put in place if you do have these disasters? You know, if there is another Hurricane Maria like happened in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, what can you do? What can you put in place to mitigate the effects of trauma? So really talking about climate change and sort of a treatment for climate change being mental health. So as a little bit of backup, that's what I've been working on.
Thank you everyone for sharing. That's a really good place to jump off to my next question, which is really focused around this idea that, you know, so often in the past in the media and just in general in society, the environment is kind of like over here, and then everything else is over here. And more, and this is really effective in reporting on the environment, is figuring out how it's intertwined with literally everything we do, right? Our health, our bank accounts, our livelihoods, our families, our business, everything. So I was hoping to hear from each of you, whoever can jump in first, really in your roles, how have you seen this manifest, and what are the ways that you sort of help connect the dots with climate change, the environment, and then economy, health, and justice, because so often we see the environment pitted against economic development as if you can't have both. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about that in your work.
I actually just want to say something very quick, which is, when you're on the coast, you can't pit the economy against the environment, because so much of the coast industry, in fact, I don't know that there is a major industry on the coast, from tourism to the oysters to any kind of fishing, to really anything that happens on the coast. Is there anything that isn't directly affected by the environment? So,
no, I would absolutely agree with that. Just from working as a mayor to the federal government, now even in NGO, the thing that strikes me the most is how we often use climate, or climate is used against us in a way to keep us apart. If you're from the South, we talk about, and we're environmentalists by nature. We can't escape it. It's around everything that we do. It doesn't make a difference if you're a teacher, if you're a lawyer, if you're a farmer. In some way, you are impacted by environment and climate. But the way that we talk about it and how it's talked about it from a national scale oftentimes keeps us divided. So the theory is, and the stereotype is that, well, folks in red states, including Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, you don't talk to them about climate change because they don't care about it. When the reality is we live it every day, probably more so than most people do. And we have not yet connected the dots. And I mean, in our nation, of just how to speak this language such that we're able to not only embrace it, but really push it forward. And I'll give you an example. You're absolutely right. You cannot talk about any issue and not talk about climate. Climate is directly related to economic development. Let's just use the storms, for example, that are happening right now. There will have to be rebuilding. In that rebuilding process, the question now becomes, how do you rebuild in a resilient and a sustainable manner such that the future, you will be in a position, and the community will be in a position to adapt and to grow past? And then, how is that directly impacting the jobs that you're creating in your community? Well, this is happening all over our country right now. You have places that are in California that have figured out, of course, their issue has to do with like earthquakes. Well, they're rebuilding in a sustainable fashion for that particular geographic region and creating an industry of jobs for young people in architecture, in engineering, in STEM, to be able to continue to sustain that with the knowledge of climate. If you look at coastal sea rise on the East Coast, the exact same thing is happening. The conversation about growth and economic development is done through the lens of sustainability and resiliency. So even when I was at EPA, when we were giving out grants to organizations, it was about how do you build resilient, how do we fund this, particularly for communities of color or poor and vulnerable communities, because I was from Greenville and I knew firsthand mayors are going to come in and they're going to say they don't have any money because I didn't have any money, and Mayor Flagg's like, you didn't have any money. So the first question is, you want to do this, but how do you do this in a way that you are funding your community and you are not bankrupting yourself, because that's the other matter. And then how are you putting people to work? Well, we can do that, and that's being done in communities all across this country through the lens of, again, resiliency and sustainability. But you can't do it if people are politically opposed to the word climate change. Because once you just say that one word, then all of a sudden your entire constituency base is like, oh, I don't have anything to do with it. Nope, that's not for us. Just go fix and pave the street. We don't care how you do it. When in reality, there's actually money out there to do it in a way that's resilient, and a way that's sustainable, and a way that will actually protect and promote communities to come. So that's just one example of how it's done. But through I think where I see it most with moms is, mothers are concerned about what is my child going to be doing in the next 10 to 15 years. There is a report called IPCC. It's the International Panel, thank you, for climate change, that is the world's best scientists that have come together that have basically told us how long we have to make some significant changes before we're in a period of irreversible change. And at first it was 12 years. Now it's 10 years, and it's going down even more. which means that my 3-year-old, before he's in high school, if something is not done now, will be in a position where we can't reverse the impact of the storms. Okay, that scares me as a mother. It scares a lot of mothers out there. But we can't, and we don't operate in fear. The next question is, okay, so what do we do? How are we increasing the opportunities for children to learn about climate work and adaptation and jobs even right now? What are the jobs that are being created? What do we need to do in respect to renewable energy? How is this going to lower my electricity bill at home? These are the questions that parents ask that we're able to answer, and are again helping to really bolster what happens in communities such that we're not operating from a space of fear, but a space of protecting and really pushing our communities forward economically and protecting them socially as well as our culture.
Well, without being redundant, first let me just say, Helen, I got money. I was talking about the city.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I need to come see you then.
Let's just say this, is that from a mayor's perspective, I truly believe that climate change, I don't know a city in this country can emphatically say that climate does not affect their city by way of infrastructure, by way of the quality of life of its citizens. No way. She mentioned mental health, by the water, the whatever you do. I think climate changes affects everybody. Now, I think there's a correlation between how you articulate how climate change affect you. The best way to do it is through the economic impact. Everything we do in Vicksburg, we measure. I don't do anything without benchmarks. We measure. And when you measure, you have to show, particularly the fiscal conservative legislators or congressmen. We got a $33 million budget. I've gotten over $40 million from state and federal government in the last 6 years. And that's because of how I articulate my need. You may not have to, you can't use the same language or the same definition everywhere you go. You have to speak the language in which you go. I got that from Huey Long from Louisiana, was a governor. He said, wherever you go, you speak the language where you go. But make sure you be effective. That means come back with the money. And I've never seen, I don't understand how people, because Donald Trump is the president, don't want to go to Washington and get the money when you pay the taxes and send it to Washington. It don't make no sense to me. That's counterproductive. But to have it said in the way that it affects us, I turn around and make certain that whatever we do in construction, whatever we do in creating jobs, whatever we do in education, whatever we do, it has a sustainable future. Healthcare, everything we do in terms of outdoor recreation, we just built the $27 million sports complex. It has walking trail. It has things that help people with their health and their quality of life. I think what we have to do is make certain that we do it. As it relates to the flood, yes, the climate has some impact of it, but what I have to do is go and show the Congress through the Corps of Engineers that we need money to be able to afford, because we don't have the money every year to put up a flood wall or do a flood protection plan. So we need money to be able to do it. It impacts our bridges, everything. And so I think in terms of how the media, I think the way the media reports it, it's, I heard the word fake news. I don't want to say it that way. Is that I don't think that they report it the way they used to report it traditionally. I met a guy long time ago in journalism that said, you ought to get the story, try to get the story first, but try to get the story right first. And when we tell the story and tell it where people around kitchen tables can understand it, I think they get it. I think legislators get it, because you have to say it in a way and report it in a way that it impact their voting. Impact their voting. I've gone in a place where everybody in the room said they wasn't going to vote for something. I came out with more than I went in there for. Because it's how you go into the room. Daddy couldn't read and write, but he told me this, and this for those folks with Donald Trump, is that you can't serve nobody if you're not at the table. And George, yes, you look different. You're different, but you're smarter than anybody at the table, if that's what you want to be. But make certain that you're at the table and that you're being effective and you get something from the table. And that's why that's how we like to address climate change too. We have to fund it, but we have to fund it in a way that is measurable and is accountable.
And I just wanted to add something too. And I think that's one of the things that is really great about what you're working on with Moms Clean Air, Heather, because I think that it is sort of changing that conversation and it's reminding people that this is a very, I think when people really started the conversation about what was then called global warming, like 30, and it really became a big part of sort of mainstream culture and the conversation 30 years ago, it was the rainforest and it was polar bears. And I don't think there's anyone here who wants to see anything bad happen to, the polar bears, the polar ice caps, but it is so much more immediate and so much of it, such an easier sell, both to the public and also to the people that they elect, when you can frame it and this is how your life could be directly affected. So I think that, when you do that, when you're talking about, these programs to really help parents and remind parents, that they have this stake in this and how these changes affect their families and their lives. I mean, I don't think that there is a better, more effective way to talk about it.
No, I could not agree more. It's amazing what seeing 100 Moms on the Hill will do. It really is, because you put moms on the Hill and send them into congressional offices to talk about specifically, you talked about a little bit about public health and its relationship, but when you watch a mother whose child is suffering from asthma and she's paying exorbitant costs to take that child to the emergency room as a result of the air and climate pollution right around her community, send her into a congressional office. I promise you, the changes and shifts that happen are effective and immediate. And these are the conversations I think that we have to have, and connecting them back home, because you're right, Mayor Flags, it's the language that we talk about. We stress and talk about activism and grassroots in climate, but doing it from a perspective of people's 5 physical senses. If you can smell it, taste it, touch it, see it, hear it, it impacts you in a way that's different than me just talking about policy. And so phrasing it in that way and getting parents to phrase it in that way makes such a tremendous difference in how people see this issue, but also see their connectivity to it and how they can have a response that's actually actionable.
Yeah. Mayor Flags, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative and your work to kind of contextualize what's flooding and infrastructure and how that ties in with the economy. I think it's 80-something mayors that are a part of it.
Well, first of all, there's the Mississippi River Towns Initiative. It's a group of mayors along the Mississippi River, about 80-something. And what we do is come together at least 3 times a year to look at the things along the Mississippi River that has an economic impact, has an environmental impact, and a cultural impact. And we put it into a budget, and we work Congress, work the White House, we work the Corps of Engineers to the point that we try to get funds like the TAGA grant, some other thing to build. That's another name for it now. I'm on the Zeta committee, and we work very good. That organization is more about collaboration and having an impact with them by being able to, as you say, put the concerns of the Mississippi River, from climate, from recreation, from cultural, everything, in a way that Congress can understand it. And, and I can't agree with you more, Helen, when you say that moms on Washington, but isn't it time for men and fathers to understand what mom's saying at the same time? I think that when you go to Congress, they ought to listen to you that send them, regardless, whether you're a mom or pop or a youngster or whoever. And I think it's how approach legislators, and that's what they are. They're congressmen, they're legislators. And the other part of it is I gotta say this because I'm a political animal too, is that we gotta start holding elected officials accountable. Mayors, dog catchers, council, everybody. Stop electing people because of a party or because they're popular. Elect the people because the fact they coincide with your philosophy or what you believe in, and hold them accountable. If they come to your church, or they come to your school, or you come to your community, make them say what they're going to do and hold them accountable for what they do. Stop electing folks because somebody else told you to vote for them.
Thanks. Heather, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about some of the grassroots initiatives and work you're seeing on the ground in responses, solutions to air pollution problems, to anything related to the environment that moms are dealing with and communities are dealing with that could maybe be replicated throughout the South.
I will do it in two ways. Okay. One is talking about programs. We talked about just how important it is for mothers and parents to be involved. But also at that table, Mayor Flax talked about being at the table. We feel very strongly that it's important that we not just be at that table, but we help to expand that table, and that we bring people with us to that table, and that table does not look the same way that it does right now after we get there. So we have a program called Eco Madres, which is focused on our Latina mothers and the issues that they're experiencing in their community, and able to address climate in a very cultural way that is specific to them. We have a program that I'm super proud of called Faith Force and Community RX, and it's Community Environmental Health Justice. And it actually came as, started from a conversation right here in the state of Mississippi when I went to go have a good a conversation with my good friend, the president of the National Baptist Convention that's right here in Jackson, Mississippi, and asked him, could I come and talk to the Women's Auxiliary? Because I'm from Greenville, I'm from Baptist, and I know if there's anything you want to get done in the black community, in the black church, no offense, but you go to the women's board, to the mother's board. And I asked him for permission to speak with the Women's Auxiliary and Mother's Board, and told him what we were trying to do. And he was so excited about it that he invited us to come. And we went to the winter board meeting, and Dr. Cynthia Spence took us from the winter board meeting to the annual meeting in New Orleans, where Moms Clean Air Force joined alongside the Women's Auxiliary for the National Baptist Convention. So this is 3,000 black church mothers from across the country that were deciding that they were going to make climate a part of their social justice platform. That was huge, and we did it in a way that was focused through a lens that they could see. It's because we created a Bible study that's called Breath of Life, that talks about issues of climate and environment from the perspective of creation care, from the perspective of what we deal with as African Americans in our community, and what we know and how we talk about it. And so it was great to see these programs take off. In fact, right before Christmas, I had my field team leader in Arizona, who is Latina, and so she heads up the Eco Madres program. She called me and she said, Heather, I just got a phone call from the state president for the Women's Auxiliary in Arizona, and we want to do a black and brown table. And I'm jumping up and down because I'm like, we're in Arizona, and I have Latina mamas and black mamas coming together to talk about how they're going to protect their babies. I couldn't be more happier, except to see it in Mississippi. That would make me happier. But that's the kind of action that happens naturally when you put people in a place where they feel comfortable, that they can expand their table, that they feel welcome, and that they have an opportunity to tell their story. Which leads me to the second thing that I will do and share with you. And I think it's critically important, and I'm always happy to get a chance to do that. Everybody have one of these little things right here? Take it out. Take it out. Now, we, and Elise, you'll I hope, have a little appreciation for this, because we talk about journalism and storytelling. This is one of the most powerful pieces of storytelling we have. What I'm going to do right now, and I want everybody, if you have not already, if you are on Twitter, on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever it may be, and have not followed Mississippi Today, and have not told people where you are and what you are doing, you are missing out on the opportunity to talk to the people that are in your network about climate and environmental change. So right now, real quick, everybody take out their phones. Everybody look. Give me just a little bit of permission here. All right, everybody smile, say hey. Hi. Wait a second. Okay, all right, here we go. Hey. All right, now, I want you to take, seriously, 5 seconds and take a picture with the person next to you if you have this on your device, or tweet or say where you are and what you're talking about. And we do this with our moms on a regular basis because what it does is it expands the conversation from this room to where you are and to your network and to your groups and to people that you connect with on a level that I may never be able to connect with. It's particularly important for Black and Brown communities to do this because we've been left out of this environmental conversation for so long that people tend to think that we're not here. I mean, if you do a Google search, and I did a speech on this, if you do a Google search on what does an environmentalist look like, all you see are white people and tree hugging. And that's not what environmentalist is. But that's the Google image that's out there because that's the perception. When the reality is climate is so much more than tree hugging and polar bears. It's people. It is the issues that we're dealing with. It is high water. It is flooding. It is infrastructure. But it is also care for the environment and the earth that has been a part of our ancestral nature since the beginning. It is my godmother saying, okay, you know that you know when it's time for the greens to come up. Don't act like you're not from the South. You know, it is those conversations that we have and hold dear to us that just come from who we are. We know when hunting season starts. We also know when hunting season shifts and changes because of the climate. We know when there's a difference. I'll tell this quick story and then move on. We had, when I was mayor, we had 2 500-year flood events. And a 500-year flood event, like a 1,000-year flood event, it's not that it happens once every 500 years. It's just that the likelihood of water reaching that level, the likelihood of that happening would happen maybe once every 500 years. We had 2. And I will never forget I had CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all on the levee, and there are people standing on one side of the levee and waiters, and they're taking pictures, and on the other side of the levee, folks are watering their lawns. And so I am doing my job of going through Greenville and making sure that people are safe and saying, you know, make sure that you know there's animals that are coming up because they're escaping the water, so there's deer running through downtown. One lady sitting on her front porch, I said, you all right? She said, girl, don't even worry about it. That deer is not good this time of year. There's not even a season for it. We're fine. Keep going. We good. And it was such a reminder to me that we know our communities. We know our seasons. We know this because it is who we are. We need to let the rest of the world know and help other people to gain from the knowledge that we have so that we can use all of our cultural competency to solve these problems together. Make sure y'all tweet now. Mississippi Today, I'm at Heather McTeer. Find out who other people are in your social media circles and make sure you make those connections before you leave.
Thank you, Heather. That was awesome. I have a bunch more questions, but I want to give you all a chance to ask some questions to any of our panelists. So please feel free to raise your hand. Anybody? Yeah.
Thank you. This is for Mayor Flags. I grew up in Vicksburg, and my family has many generations of roots, and we were a county, so we were always downtown, not out in the country. This panel is supposed to be focused on resilience, and I realize a lot of that deals with natural disasters and climate change, but trying to get real personal and holding leaders accountable, I would love to hear what you are doing specifically to lead on an issue that is very personal for people when they have houses that are old. You live in one of the most historic, oldest cities in America, and you're also in a community that has tremendous amount of poverty. How can you lead, and maybe as a representative for other mayors, how do we get folks who are in desperate poverty, who have houses falling all around them, to offer incentives through private leveraging and private affiliations to help them pull themselves out of this situation with any programs that you can offer, whether they're interest-free loans or whether they're tax abatements or anything that can help people rebuild their homes when they are in poverty and keep Vicksburg the beautiful place it's always been when there's such poverty there. Thank you.
I think you basically gave the answer to the question, but I reiterated. I think you're right. Vicksburg is a very historical town, and it's a very pretty town, and we don't have as much poverty as the census may indicate by looking at the per capita income. We're doing a number of things, and one, I think you have to be transparent. Two, you have to have a plan, and you have to have a plan that is reachable. And what we do, we're reaching out to the federal government and the state government and utilizing some of the blight elimination programs. We're leading the state in blight elimination. That's where you can go in and identify those houses where people cannot afford to bring them up to code, and then allow grants to allow, and we oversee those grants. You have to monitor, oversee those grants to make sure that we improve their housing and things. The other thing what we're doing, we're modifying our codes. I think it's very important that you modify your codes and look at code enforcement and exercise them, execute them. Make certain that, and it is a problem sometimes because poor people or people that lack the money is going to give you reasons why they can't do this, can't do that. But what you have to do is provide a system program. Another thing we've done is that first-time home buyers. We go in and get these moms that she's talking about, or these people that need in rental properties. I've never been an advocate of the county housing programs that the federal government institute. I think vouchers. I know folks don't like vouchers, but I like being able to afford my house. I think we need to look out on programs so that you can be able to give folks money, down payment money to put in the house. The other thing is, in my community, in most communities, urban areas, is that what you call is the credit reporting. You have to help people with their credit scores and how to go around. A lot of folks, I used to be chairman of banking and finance. Everybody thinks that you cannot qualify because of your credit score. That's the biggest, I don't know what. Credit scores is nothing but a measurement to the bank to determine whether or not the risk. Stop telling folks because they got a high credit score. I had the highest credit score you could have and still bought a car. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the lending institution being able to determine the risk if they lend you the money. And of course, you're going to borrow it at a higher rate. But we need to help folks with that. And how you do that is that in the legislature, I created opportunities. I worked with the late Thad Cochran on some federal legislation to do financial literacy. We need financial literacy in every school in America. To teach people how to write a check, how to balance a checkbook, and how to spend within their own means, and those type of things. And they can be taught. So we do things like that. The other thing is that you have to bring your community together around culture and understanding. Everybody can't live and afford to live in a historical district. You can't. The high ceiling houses, they were built in the early days. They can't afford it. They get in now, but they can't afford the upkeep. You have to have programs like that. So that's what we try to do in a combination of what you just said. We make certain that we hold people accountable, but we at the same time, we assist them when they need assistance.
Thanks.
Actually, can I jump in really quick
Oh, yeah,
off of,
sure.
one of the things that I really like hearing about all these systems that you're talking about, because one of the big concerns right now, just on the national level, is that when it comes to things like climate change, when it comes to, environmental disasters, the naturally more resilient people, it's going to depend on income. people of higher income levels are going to be naturally more resilient than people at lower income levels. There's a theory, or there's a saying in Hancock County about Hurricane Katrina. If you were fine before Katrina, you're fine now. If you were bad off before Katrina, you're really bad off now. And it's a question of access, really. The people who are from higher income groups tend to have access to, if you're talking about mental health, therapy. They tend to have access to, better insurance programs, better lending, better things like that allow you to rebuild your life. And so I do think when it comes to resilience, the big thing, the onus really is on the structure. It's on our officials, and it's on the federal government to put these policies into place that level the playing field a little bit more, because otherwise, I mentioned the increase in temperatures affecting students' test scores. Well, people whose test scores they're more likely to be the students who are in unair conditioned schools. So if you want to level the playing field, you have to put these policies into place that make it mandatory in certain parts of the country to have air conditioning in schools. So, yeah.
I just want two more quick things. Two things that are available right now. They're in the House. House bills that have been passed. One is the 100% Clean Economy Act, which actually allows for cities like Vicksburg, if it is passed, to access funding that will provide for infrastructure that's sustainable and resilient. And the other piece that has passed through the House is the National Climate Bank. So the House has passed a bill that will allow funding to cities like Vicksburg and other communities across the country, that when it comes to specific issues that the city can develop and programming that they can develop, then the city would have access to use this funding along with private capital to help to restore some of those very important cultural icons. So there are action items that are right now sitting in the House. There are things that the House has done to help to make sure cities have the resources and tools that they need. It's just about getting them moved through, and once they are, I think you'll see that there are a lot of cities and mayors that will have and will be able to use those to really preserve some of the climate crises that they have in their communities.
Yeah, thanks.
I miss one
Well,
point.
we might have to.
I miss one point.
Okay.
And I think it's very important, because every community, every city, every state got it. But the media has demonized it. The best vehicle out there now came out of the last tax credit bill that Congress passed, the Opportunity Zone. If Opportunity Zone is not for poor people, what is? It goes on a poverty track, but because Trump is the president, nobody wants to use it. It is one of the best vehicles. I utilized it. I was first in the nation to use the Opportunity Zone. But when you listen to the media, that's not y'all though, the people outside, that you would think that that's the worst tool in America. It is not. We have to utilize it, and I hope that you look at some of the models out there, and that's how we can revitalize our community.
Thanks. I think we have one more.
Yeah, one more
We squeeze one
question.
more.
Hi, my name is Cameron Thomas, and I wanted to ask, I know that you all deal with climate change through various different mediums, and I wanted to ask, how do you deal with people who don't actually believe in climate change? And through your own mediums, how do you, convince these people that this is actually a problem that affects everyone in our world today?
I was going to say, Larison, if you want to talk quickly about the media's role in that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I hate to say it, but to me, you just kind of have to accept that it's fact. And you have to talk about it like it is. And there's just, if people aren't going to believe it, then that's their sort of problem. But, I think in telling this Katrina story, one of the things that I'm putting in there, I mentioned climate change. You talk about those kinds of things, but you also just talk about, okay, so you don't believe in climate change. Well, fine, but let's just talk about what is changing, which is that in the last, if you look at the 10 tropical cyclones that have dropped the most rainfall in the United States, well, one of the 10 worst was Harvey. Actually, the worst was Harvey in 2017. The fourth worst, or I think, was Florence, or no, sorry, it was Imelda last year. And then, like, the seventh worst was Florence in the Carolinas in 2018. And so you've got 3 of the worst of the top 10 all happening back to back. So, you know, you just kind of put that out there, and hopefully the evidence stacks up.
My personal observation is that I think you got to simplify it. The second thing is that when you deal with the cost of it, whatever it is from the government perspective, you've got to phase it in. You can't talk about the total cost. When you start talking about trillions and trillions of dollars, it scares people. And then you have to define. One of the things that I've always said, especially as a politician, my job is to define me before my opponent define me. Define me. Whatever I know about me, I'm going to tell you before they tell you. But I'm going to tell you in a way that is acceptable and it's effective. So what we have to do is simplify climate control, come up with a definition that is conducive for if you was in New York, you was in Mississippi, you was in Roller Falls, that's got 5,000 people, or California that got millions of people. And so all of us got to speak within the issue with it up there in Washington. Well, leave Washington alone.
Well, I make it real simple. When folks say, oh, I don't believe in climate change, I say, well, that's like God. Some folks don't believe in God, doesn't mean God doesn't exist or doesn't believe in you. And the reason I say it like that is because generally the people who are saying that they don't believe are in the evangelical community. So I have to talk that language, as Mayor Flagg said, talk the language that they talk, and talk in terms that they talk, and make it a reality. And it's not that climate is changing. The climate has changed. So now we are dealing with climate crisis, emergency, and safety. And so by using those terms, I'm now able to talk to people who are in that group that may not believe in a way that is talking about their protection of things that they love. It is talking to them in a way that things that they understand. It's like the wind. We don't see the wind, but we feel it. And we know when it's blowing hard. So I think language and being able to speak to people in a way that they accept, that they understand, but then giving them action items and things to do is very helpful. And usually when I make that connection, they can't disagree with that. At least those that believe in God can.
Right, and market